And this is Ken Kraetzer for Sons of American Legion Radio. Today, our Army football huddle. We've had an unprecedented day. Well, we had a day in August that wasn't so different from this. Both the games for the Air Force Academy at Army and the Naval Academy at Tulsa have been canceled due to outbreaks of COVID-19 at the Naval Academy and at the Air Force Academy. Now, joining us tonight, we have Richard Miller calling in from Florida. Richard, how are you?
I'm very well, Ken. How about you?
Okay, and calling in from the Beat Navy studio in Huntsville, Alabama, we've got Colonel Sam Houston, a member of the West Point class of '87. Sam, how are you tonight?
I'm great, Ken. I'm still feeling beat. I'm still feeling beat Air Force inside, but that spirit is dampened a little bit today with the news.
Yeah, I mean, this really came out of nowhere. Air Force was going to be flying into New York tonight to get a little head start on getting set for the game on Saturday morning, 11:30 start on CBS, and as we said, the big CBS. And news came out of the academy about 2 o'clock, actually, because I was supposed to do an interview at West Point with one of the Army captains about the game, and that was canceled. And then a few minutes later, I got a couple of notes about the game, and you contacted me, Sam, having heard some chatter from West Point alumni. And then we saw the note that came out of the Colorado Springs Gazette saying that their information from multiple sources, what that was that the game was canceled. And so later today, about 4 o'clock, the Air Force Academy issued a press release, a brief one, and I'll just mention it, that the game is postponed due to upward trends of COVID-19 cases here at the Academy football program and in the surrounding community. The schools will work to reschedule if possible. And there's a statement from the director of athletics of the Air Force Academy, Nathan Pine, said, as we said, due to the upward trends in our COVID numbers across the campus, we have paused all intercollegiate team activities. So, quite a unfortunate event for the Air Force Academy. We kind of thought the service academies were in the best position to avoid COVID outbreaks because they're military bases. They, as Coach Munkin says, they have MPs at the gate, and the cadets and the midshipmen and airmen at Air Force. My understanding was they couldn't leave the campus. I know that's been the policy at West Point, but certainly the instructors and staff at the academies go home to their families and the outside community every night. Sam, what was your take on what happened?
I'm not surprised, actually. In my work, there is actually part of the program that I'm a part of. We have facilities out in Colorado Springs, and this week we've actually had an outbreak at the facility that have affected multiple members of our team at that facility, and it's caused a lot of reporting that's had to go up to our customer and procedures being taken to safeguard sanitation of the facility. And so when I heard this today, part of me said this must be tied to an outbreak that seems to be going around in the Colorado Springs area. As you were mentioning, I texted you when I first heard because it sprung up on Twitter first. There was no verification of it. There was just a Colorado Springs Gazette article. I went to the article. It had unnamed sources, and it referenced a tweet that had been deleted by one of the Air Force Academy football players. And based on that information, I reached out to you just to see if you could confirm anything. And while I was chatting with you about it, more information started to be updated and provided. And within the hour, there was the announcement made. I had actually gone on ESPN, and on their ticker, they mentioned that the very same Colorado Springs Gazette article. So clearly, what's going on at Air Force Academy, It's disappointing. It's unexpected. And all I can say is that whatever controlling and monitoring that they do, as we call it, keeping the players under the bubble, they obviously didn't work. Whether that means some cadets were allowed to leave the Air Force Academy and came in contact with some people, I guess we'll never know. But unfortunately, the decision has been made. The game has been postponed. And let's just pray that it gets rescheduled.
Yes, and let's hope for all the individuals who are affected that they recover from this very quickly, and it's they don't encounter serious cases of COVID. But you mentioned rescheduling, and the challenge with it is that there aren't many open dates left. We're more than halfway through the season, the normal season for college football, and with the Mountain West, when they resumed play in late October, they basically said, let's play every week that they could, and then still have a championship game, and then still be eligible for playing in bowl games. So they don't have much slack. And then some people had said, well, maybe a game could be played the week after the Army-Navy game. And the challenge with that is, as you know better than I, that's exam week for West Point and quite likely for Air Force. And there are certain things that are absolutely, seem to me, in my view, are sacred, and that is exam week. Most sports teams don't play during exam week, with rare exceptions. And but what's your take on that, Sam? Do you see any possibilities on rescheduling?
I do. The major implication about this whole situation is Commander-in-Chief trophy. And it would be a travesty if we're unable to complete the three-way rivalry that comprises the Commander-in-Chief trophy. Air Force has got to be very hungry to have an opportunity to bring the Commander-in-Chief trophy back to Colorado Springs, given the fact that they haven't earned it. This would be the fourth season where they have an opportunity to earn it, but the last three seasons they did not earn the trophy. Two of the seasons went to Army, and last season, I hate to say it, went to Navy. Now, that being said, it would be a very good thing for both academies if they are able to do whatever negotiations, whatever coordinations they need to do, both internally to each respective service academy and reaching across the aisle in coordination with each other to ensure that this game is rescheduled. I realize that one weekend, that one Saturday between the Army-Navy game and the Independence Bowl is the only opening that they seem to have available between now and the new year. That being said, it isn't inconceivable that they could rearrange a few things internal to both academies to make that a reality. The wild cards that exist, obviously, will Air Force earn the right to go to a bowl game? Will Air Force earn the right to play in the Mountain West Championship game, which is the same weekend, by my understanding? I don't think that they're on track to be in the Mountain West Championship game. The other wild card that I mentioned, a bowl game, they do not seem to be on track to get a bowl bid either. However, the final wild card is the biggest one of all is the final exam, the term end exams that the cadets have to go through. And term end exam week is a very grueling academic experience. And of course, all of the cadet athletes are at the service academy. Their academics, their military training, their military professional development, that always comes first. So they didn't go to the academies to play football, and we do understand that. However, given the Commander-in-Chief trophy implications, I think there is an exception here where the academies would be willing to work with the academic staffs and with the players on the respective teams to coordinate for their term end exams to be taken during an alternative time period. That might be For the Air Force Academy, I can't speak for them. It might be the week following the game. For the West Point team, America's team, the Army football team, they have the bowl game they have to get ready to, so they have a very tight window. But I do know that it is not without precedent that the Army football team has been given an alternative final exam period that allows them to either complete their final exams early or take them at a later date. So that being said, the possibility is certainly there. I really hope that the staffs of both respective academies and the athletic departments do not turn their back on making sure that every stone is overturned and looked underneath to find an opportunity to complete the Commander-in-Chief trophy.
Is playing the game in January a possibility in your mind, Sam?
It's funny you bring that up because you and I did talk about that this morning or this afternoon when the news of this first started to break. There's some things to take into consideration. What does the NCAA allow? Would they allow a game after the new year, after the bowl season, where the teams can come together and play? Do you maybe play the Army Air Force game during the normal window of when bowl games would be played, which would mean Army would play the Independence Bowl and then go on a very shortened Christmas break, come back and start preparing to play Air Force sometime in the first week of January? That's a good question. But if you go beyond that, are you violating the NCAA rules on organized and supervised spring football? So if that's the case, you might have to push the game all the way out into the spring unless the NCAA makes an exception. Now, here's the kicker, and this is what I brought up with you, and this is where I can be a little opinionated about things. I would think that Air Force Academy would prefer that scenario, and here's why. Because as we know, and as we've talked about before, Air Force allowed a significant number of their players, I'm told primarily on their defense, to be deferred a semester and to sit out. And so that means that all of these players would be back. And Air Force would love to have all of those players back in time to play Army, because they want the Commander-in-Chief's trophy. So let me just add a disclaimer and a kicker, a little caveat to the whole idea of playing the Army Air Force game after the new year with NCAA rules adjusted so that they can play. My kicker is that, yeah, you do that, but your roster of today is the roster that plays the game, not a bunch of players that sat out the semester and suddenly are back on the team. That's not the level playing field. You bring the players who sat out and put them on their roster, you're talking about next year's team. Now we're talking about this season's teams. So we'll see what happens.
Okay, we're hearing how these things what some people think. It's interesting. Sam, we'll see. I think that's maybe a good point about the roster should be frozen if they did play in January. I think the NCAA is going to be making a lot of accommodations. The only question is there are a lot of games that have been postponed that are big revenue games, and let's say the Pac-12, instead of they all missed. They're playing like 7 games. So they're all missed 5, and they came along and said, well, how about if we play the 5 games we missed in March and April, and we might even have spectators there. That's going to be kind of an interesting question, whether the NCAA would say, we'll do that instead of spring football practice, we'll allow regulation games where they're keeping score, and we'll see. It's going to be, hopefully the world is in better shape and we can worry about scheduling football games in the spring, and that be wonderful if the COVID pandemic had lessened by then. We can only hope so, but we'll see. Okay, the other big news, and we're going to get to Richard in a minute with scores from last week, is the Naval Academy had their game canceled this week against Tulsa. They were going to travel for that, and actually, it's their home game, which makes this kind of an interesting speculation opportunity. Saturday's home game against Tulsa has been postponed by the American Athletic Conference due to an outbreak among Navy football players, and this according to the Capital Gazette of Annapolis, Maryland. So their game was canceled because of an outbreak, and it's unclear if the game can be rescheduled. It's unclear whether next week's game for Navy against Memphis would be affected as well, whether there's a 2-week quarantine. It's sort of been a question like how many players are out that you can't field the team. And some teams have played with quite a few players missing, and others have canceled. There was some speculation. The speculation opportunity is that since Tulsa was traveling east anyway, they had their plane reservation. Why not have them come and play at West Point? Neither team would have seen each other, thought about each other much until today. So just play a football game. You got a CBS television time slot. Pretty good game, Army and Tulsa. What do you think, Sam? Is that something we may get a press release on today or tonight?
It's feasible. I've already seen a little bit of traffic saying that was not going to happen, but much like the announcement earlier today about the Air Force game being suspended, you gotta take it with a grain of salt until you see verification, because I also have seen posts where Army is scrambling to find somebody to fill in this weekend on very, very short notice, and there are teams available. Tulsa would make sense because, as you pointed out, they're already coming out to the East Coast. It wouldn't be that big of a stretch to get them on up to our Rockbound Highland home and put them up into Thayer and go right at it.
Their hotel has got a big vacancy now for the weekend.
Yeah, no doubt. And I would imagine that Tulsa would be more excited about that opportunity on short notice than Army would, because of the similarities between preparation for Navy and West Point for the Army team that Tulsa would have had to go through. Either way, you're playing a triple option offense, albeit slightly different. You got Ivan Jasper's offense with Navy, and you got Brent Davis's offense with Army. But the basics of triple option football are still the same. And so Tulsa certainly has been preparing for a week to play a triple option team. Now or never, they have the opportunity to. So we'll see what happens with that. It would definitely be the equivalent of the childhood backyard football game, where it's basically, hey, I pick you and you and you, and you're going to be on my team, and I'll play your team, and we're just going to go at it for the next 60 minutes and see how it goes. I think that would be a real test. It would be a real test to do something like that, no matter who the team is, if Army could make it happen. It would be such a true test to the maturity of the Army football players on both sides of the ball, number one. And number two, it would be the best kind of test that you could put your coaching staff through, because you would have to make rapid fire adjustments to make yourself fix what you weren't prepared for going into the game. And there would be a whole bunch of things that you weren't ready for. So that would be an opportunity to see who has the better coaching staff that can adjust their players accordingly to make corrections for things they had not prepared for. So I'd love to see that. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah, I think for the offenses, it would be kind of, we'll do what we're good at and see if you can stop us. On defense, it's different. You got to play. You don't know what the other team is going to do because you haven't watched that much film of them, looking at their formations and looking at their tendencies. They chart all that out, of course. Usually they do it 6 months in advance, but then they update it based on the most recent couple of games. But for the Army defensive players, I think it would be a growing experience because they'd have to learn so much on the fly. They wouldn't, they'd have to be able to play more like they maybe did in high school on instinct rather than on well, the coach says if they're in this formation, they're going to do X, Y, or Z, and have their assignments all issued out. So we'll see, but it's all speculation. It's fun in a tough situation. A lot of people have, you know, and there's a lot of financial considerations involved with this too. Hopefully the health situations are okay. But see, you know, that's the kind of game, Army and Tulsa, you could probably sell it to CBS as worth their time instead of switching to an SEC game. You know,
Right, big time. You know, speaking of Tulsa, they have a winning record, and I just happened to watch the Tulsa ECU game this past Saturday, and I hope Army players did too in the event that they do play Tulsa. As a caveat to the discussion about Tulsa is that Tulsa actually was the beneficiary of a blown call on their last drive of the game against ECU, and the NCAA actually came out after the game and issued an apology for a bad call when a Tulsa player had fumbled and ECU had recovered, and all ECU would have had to have done at that point was to run out the clock. But instead, the referee doing the review of the play determined that it was not a fumble, and that Tulsa was allowed to retain the ball and continue their drive. So, but that's not saying that they don't have skill, they don't have speed. They do. They throw the long ball well. They got a big mobile quarterback. So, yeah, it would be a huge test for the Army defense, a defense that has taken 2 weeks now to prepare for Air Force, and then suddenly they're faced with a more pro set read option style offense that likes to throw the ball. So, yeah, I'd like to see it, but, you know, time will tell. We'll see what happens.
Yeah, we'll keep, I've been checking my mobile phone on Twitter about every 5 minutes all afternoon for announcements and developments. Now, Richard Miller, you've been patiently waiting to take us through some of the scores, the games that you track. Boy, Rutgers had a big win under Greg Schiano this weekend.
This weekend, Rutgers lost to number 17 Indiana 37-21.
Oh, it's close. I was watching that when they won the week before against Michigan State.
Although week this is week 10, right? This is week 10. Okay. So going into the week 9 scores, now I have to refresh my page again. Michigan State 27-24 over number 13 Michigan. Both teams are 1-1 on the season. Cincinnati 49-10 over Memphis. Cincinnati improves to 5-0. They are ranked number 7. Memphis goes to 3-2 on the season. Also, number 5 Georgia Bulldogs 14-3 over Kentucky, who falls now to 2-4 on the season. Kansas State and West Virginia, number 16 Kansas State loses 37-10 to West Virginia. Both teams are now 4-2 on the season. Number 1 Clemson is 7-0, now beating 34-28 Boston College without Trevor Lawrence, who tested positive for COVID-19. Also, number 23 Iowa State 4-2 improves to 4-2 over Kansas, who falls to 0-6, 52-22 the score in that game. Coastal Carolina, number 20, 51-0 over Georgia State. Georgia State is now 2-3. Coastal Carolina is 6-0. Indiana 37-21 over Rutgers. Indiana is 2-0. They're ranked number 17 in the country, while Rutgers is 1-1 on the season. Notre Dame continues to roll right along as they are ranked number 4, a 6-0 record with a 31-13 win over Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is 2-5 on the season. Notre Dame is 6-0. Got an overtime game in Texas and Oklahoma State. Texas is now 4-2, a 41-34 victory, while Oklahoma State suffers their first loss of the season at 4-1. Number 25 Boise State 49-30 over Air Force. Air Force is 1-2 on the season. Boise State is now 2-0 on the season. Number 2 Alabama 41-0 over Mississippi State. Mississippi State is now 1-4 on the season. while Alabama is 6-0 on the season. Number 3, Ohio State, and number 18, Penn State. A primetime game last week. 2-0 for Ohio State, 38-25 victory. Penn State falls to 0-2. Ohio State is now 2-0 on the season. Navy 3-4 on the season now, losing to SMU, which improves a 6-1, a 51-37 victory for SMU. Texas A&M and Arkansas. Texas A&M wins 42-31 over Arkansas. Texas A&M is 4-1 on the season. Arkansas is 2-3 on the season. Texas A&M is ranked number 8. Number 10, Florida improves to 3-1, a 41-17 victory over Missouri. Missouri goes to 2-3 on the season. Florida is 3-1 on the season. Number 15, North Carolina, in a really close game, 44-41 lost to Virginia. Virginia is 2-4. North Carolina goes to 4-2 on the season. Number 24, Oklahoma, 62-28 over Texas Tech. Oklahoma now goes to 4-2 on the season. Texas Tech goes to 2-4 on the season. Number 11, BYU, improving to 7-0, while Western Kentucky goes to 2-5 on the season. A 41-10 victory for BYU. And this week in the top 25, number 11, Miami, 5-1, taking on NC State. That's at 7:30. NC State is 4-2 on the season. BYU 7-0, number 9 now, taking on number Boise State, which is 2-0 on the season. They're 21st in the country, a 9:45 start. Saturday at noon, West Virginia 4-2, taking on Texas, which is 4-2 on the season. They're ranked number 22 in the country. Liberty, number 25, is 6-0, taking on Virginia Tech, which is now 4-2 on the season. That will be a high noon start. These next 3 games are high noon starts. Number 18, SMU, taking on Temple. Temple's 1-3 on the season. SMU is 6-1 on the season. Michigan 1-1 on the season. They're ranked 23rd. Indiana is now 2-0 on this. That's a high noon start. Number 20, USC and Arizona State will kick off at noon. Massachusetts and number 16, that was number 20, USC. Number 16, Marshall and Massachusetts. Number 16, Marshall is 5-0 on the season. Massachusetts is 0-1 on the season. Number 6, Cincinnati, 5-0, taking on Houston, which is 2-2. That game's at 3:30. The world's largest outdoor cocktail party, 3:30 this Saturday. Number 8, Florida, taking on number 5, Georgia. Georgia's 4-1. Florida is 3-1. Number 19, Oklahoma is 4-2, while Kansas is now 0-6 on the season. Oklahoma State 4-1, taking on Kansas State, which is 4-2. Oklahoma State is ranked number 14th in the country. Number 17, Iowa State, taking on Baylor. Iowa State is now 4-2, while Baylor is 1-3 on the season. Texas A&M and South Carolina. Number 7, Texas A&M is 4-1 on the season, while South Carolina is now 2-3 on the season. Number 10, Wisconsin's 1-0. Purdue was 2-0 on the season. That was canceled because of a COVID-19 outbreak.
Which game was that, Richard?
What?
Which game was that game that you said was canceled?
The Purdue against number 10, Wisconsin.
Wow, so another cancellation for Wisconsin. I believe that they lost a game at Nebraska, which actually, Sam, brings up a question in college football: is how many games you have to play to have a valid season. Some schools have really struggled to be able to fulfill their schedules, because there still will be a college football playoff, and there will be associated New Year's Day bowls and many of the secondary bowls. But how many games do you think you have to play in order to be eligible for one of these, do you think?
It's a good question. And the season, obviously, there's different rules that apply. Yeah. So I would say 6. I mean, 6 victories. They waived the FCS FBS victory rule this year to help teams along with their seasons that were abbreviated to be bowl eligible. So I would say 6 games would be a good number, because that would put you at 50% of a normal college football season, but that's just me offering an opinion.
Yeah, it's going to be strange. I mean, the strangest thing was to the perspective that Army was awarded a bid to the Independence Bowl with a 6-1 record, and the team that they will play from the Pac-12 hadn't started their season yet. And I kind of asked Coach Monken about that in the press conference this week. I asked him, the perspective. He's played 7 games, and the Air Force Academy's only played 3. Which team has the advantage in that? Is it the team that's played more games and is more mature and experienced, or is it the team that's played less games and doesn't have the wear and tear of a long college football season? What do you think, Sam?
I don't think when you're talking about a service academy matchup, there's really a great advantage from one or the other. At least there shouldn't be on paper, because the motivation is certainly there to play each other. But if you want to just look at how are the teams playing on the field, I think advantage goes to Army. Army's clearly playing better this year than the other 2 service academies, and their record speaks for it. Some people will take a look at the fact that Army's schedule hasn't actually been that tough, and I would agree with that to an extent. 3 of the victories are against FCS opponents. 2 of the FBS teams that they played are having dismal seasons. And then you look at the 1 loss that Army had, and I can use that as an example that Army's actually playing pretty daggum good this year, and that is
Cincinnati is one of the top.
Cincinnati has had 1 game this year where they had to struggle, where they were in a dogfight for 3.5 quarters, and that was against Army.
Yeah, and no doubt. A couple of plays, and Army would have been neck and neck to the end with them. And I think of that Christian Anderson fumble in the 3rd quarter. A couple other plays. Army played Cincinnati very strong and gave them everything. As you said, their toughest opponent of the year. Richard, do you have any more games to go over?
South Alabama is playing Coastal Carolina, 6-0 Coastal Carolina. South Alabama is 3-0. Number 1 Notre Dame. Number 4 Notre Dame is 6-0, taking on number 1 Clemson, 7-0, and they will not have Trevor Lawrence playing in that game.
Now, so that makes it a really interesting game at South Bend, Clemson and Notre Dame, and Clemson playing without their starting quarterback, although they have depth. Sam, we got to get your comments on the 2 Service Academy games last week. Boise State put up 49 points against against Air Force, although Air Force ran for 415 yards in that game. How does a team lose if you can run for 415 yards?
That's a great question, and the real answer to that is it was a scoring fest. The team that made mistakes on offense is the team that came out on the bottom, and Air Force made mistakes on offense that resulted in failing to flip field position or turnovers that Boise State was able to profit off of, and they got up and score pretty dramatically and put Air Force into a catch-up role. And in that regards, I'd say a lot of Air Force's yards were when they were trying to play catch-up, and they were, they did have success running the ball. Boise State had a bend but don't break philosophy on defense that was willing to give up yards, but not give up points, and it was successful. So the game, and I did watch the game. I was flipping channels between Air Force and Navy because they were on simultaneously. So there were bits and snatches of the game. Obviously, I wasn't able to catch when I'm trying to watch both games at the same time. But the thing about the Boise State Air Force game was that Boise State exposed Air Force's defense, the fact that they're missing defensive players. You had players on the defense who had been converted from offense trying to play. And Boise State runs a complicated offense, and they run it very well. And they very easily were catching Air Force defenders out of position, out of coverage, and it resulted in a lot of big plays and a lot of pay dirt plays for Boise State that allowed them to go up big. So, but Air Force, again, clearly Boise State had a game plan, and the game plan was not that we need to stop Air Force's run. We just need to keep them out of the end zone. And they had definitely watched something that San Jose State had done the week before, because they were successful in keeping Air Force from being able to play touchdown for touchdown, because they simply weren't.
Okay, quick thought on the Navy SMU game.
First thing is, last week I told you, watch this game. You want to know how Navy actually does stack up against Army. You want your best bet about how the two teams stack up against each other. I said, watch how they play against SMU, because the week before, SMU had been absolutely humiliated by Cincinnati. And as we already discussed, Cincinnati's only game that they actually had where they were sweating in the fourth quarter was against Army. So SMU came in and, well, actually, Navy went out to SMU, and SMU steamrollered Navy. That's the only way to put it. The game was, the score of the game was only closer than it should have been, because in the fourth quarter, SMU had taken out their starters because they were up, I believe, 51-17 or something like that. And they took out some of their starters, and they committed, the backups committed an unfortuitous turnover on offense that Navy capitalized on, and then Navy was able to score another couple of gimme touchdowns in the fourth quarter to make the score closer than it really was. The game was never in doubt from start to finish. Navy's defense, I'm just going to say Navy's defense, for all the accolades Newberry got last year with Navy's defense, none of those accolades count for a thing this year. Navy's defense has just looked horrendous every single game. They've given up massive yards. They've given up massive yards through the air. They've given up massive yards on the ground. And they've given up, I believe, at a minimum of 24 points every game, and that was the ECU game. And every other game they've given up more than that. Yeah. So Navy's really, they're struggling this year.
Hey, quick thought for you, Sam, and then we should break. Is who would have played quarterback for Army this week, do you think?
Well, I was actually going to ask you about it because, you know, going into this discussion earlier today, the expectation is that we were going to be spending the bulk of our time talking about the game on Saturday. And it's so, again, very disappointing that we're not talking about the game on Saturday. But I was going to ask you and pick your brain on what some of the information you would learn from Monken about the status of injuries on various players. If Anderson was healthy, Anderson would start. And that's because I believe Monken does put his faith in his roster and in his depth. And so if he says a quarterback is the number one quarterback and that quarterback's healthy, then that's the person who's going to start the game. However, if things had not necessarily gone well, or if Anderson had proven to not be 100% once he got on the field, I don't think Monken would have hesitated to go back to the Cade Ballard, Tyler combination, because that seems to have been working pretty well the past couple of games and keep defenses off balance.
Well, I agree. Coach Monken was very very specific in his praise of Cade Ballard following the last game. That he said that he is can do all the things that is needed as the Army quarterback, which is quite an endorsement of a first-year player. And again, I agree. If Christian Anderson was healthy, he would have gotten the start. And but you might have seen two quarterbacks. The question in my mind is whether he would let Cade Ballard play a whole game, or does he really feel like they need to do this combination of with Tyree Tyler? And then you have Jamel Jones, who had, I thought it was a pretty minor injury, ran off the field on looked like he turned his ankle a little bit. But the word I've got is that he's not really ready, may not be ready to play. And then I don't know who you pick behind Cade Ballard, whether Tyree Tyler or Jamel Jones would be the next player up. And we don't have access to even watch practice this year. I was kind of looking forward to, we do our coverage of the warm-ups on our page, West Point Football Report, and just watching, as we did the last time, who's getting the most snaps in warm-up is a pretty good indicator who's going to play in the game. So we'll see. Richard, now you've been keeping track of some of the games. I see, at least two major games that you're going to be watching, and you're talking about Georgia versus Florida in your neck of the woods up in Jacksonville. And hopefully that game will be played. I don't know if they're going to have a lot of spectators, but it seems like most of the Southeast Conference games are allowing about 25%. And so who do you like in that game, Richard?
What do I like in that game? I like Georgia.
Okay, you're not going to go with the hometown for you, Florida Gators. And the other big game you were talking about, I know you're going to be watching, is Notre Dame hosting Clemson. And
Yep.
who do you like there?
I think I like Notre Dame in this one.
Okay, so for Notre Dame to take for an upset win over Clemson and have a big night at Notre Dame Stadium. Richard, I appreciate it. Thank you for your help tonight. And Sam Houston. Absolutely. And Sam Houston calling in from Huntsville, Alabama. Thank you for your help and insight. And hopefully the Tulane game down in New Orleans will be played next week, and we can talk about that next week. And
just as a caveat to the mention of the Tulane game, as of today, I have actually completely canceled my plan to go to New Orleans next weekend for a variety of reasons. One, there's no fans allowed in the stadium for the game. Second, the West Point Society is not gathering to watch the game because of COVID restriction. And then last but not least, I got an email this morning from my hotel saying that due to lack of occupancy, they have closed the hotel. And they did offer for me to go stay at one of their sister hotels, but it was nowhere close to where we had wanted to be in New Orleans. So we just made the judgment call that we're just not even going to go. And the game is going to be broadcast on ESPN Plus. So if you want to watch it, you're going to have to do pay-per-view through ESPN Plus to view it. I did want to say one thing. I did want to say one thing about this weekend. Sans Academy football, and that's a sad thing to say. The game I'm going to be watching, the game I'm most interested in, is one of the ones that Richard was interested in, and that is the Notre Dame Clemson game. It's going to be very interesting to see how Clemson does. They struggled against Boston College without Trevor Lawrence. They've got to go to South Bend and play Notre Dame without Trevor Lawrence. But I tell you, when this game comes and goes, I'm going to go with Clemson. I believe Dabo Swinney is a better coach. I think he has a better coaching staff. I think that he's got better athletes all around. And the quarterback now has one game under his belt. It gets some of those butterflies out of his gut. I think it'll be a hard-fought game, but I really think Dabo and his staff have their team ready to go into South Bend and deliver the victory. It's going to be a good game. And on a side note, Ken, I want you to just sometime when you are listening to a press conference or you're listening to Dabo Swinney talking on the sideline or talking to the press, I want you to just close your eyes and imagine you're listening and imagine you're listening to Mark West of the Army sprint team, because I'm telling you, They sound and talk exactly alike. And every single time I see Dabo Sweeney, I think, listen, there's Mark West talking through Dabo Sweeney's body there. And
Sure.
one thing that happened with all our technical difficulties last week that we experienced, and I don't mean to hold you up, is that our introductory discussions got edited out because of the challenges we had, and we had to redo the beginning. And I realized afterward that that when we redid the beginning, I forgot to say anything about my team, the sprint football team, Army Sprint, former 150s. I want to, it's belated kudos at this point. It's 2 weeks back, but Mark West had his team ready. They rolled into Annapolis and at Marine Corps Memorial Stadium in the rain. They played the Navy Sprint team for the star, and in a defensive struggle, they took it home. So congratulations to the Army Sprint, formerly 150s team, my old team, for beating Navy and showing us once again how it's done.
Okay, I'm sure Coach Mark West would like to utilize Dabo Sweeney's contract and see if he can work out similar terms in coaching at West Point. No, that's great. Congratulations to the Army Sprint team. Okay, we got a break. And we're going to also track Coach Munkin's radio show tonight and see if he has any special announcements or any additional perspective on what happened, what transpired today. No football for the service academies unless something special is announced tonight or early tomorrow morning, which we're not. You know, we're keeping an eye on our Twitter account. I mean, that's sort of like one of those days. Anyway, I want to thank again Richard Miller for our producer director, and Sam Houston from the West Point class of '87 and the Army Sprint football team. And this is Ken Kraetzer for Sons of the American Legion Radio. And we'll be back next week, and watch our show on Monday on WVOX 1460 at 2:30. Again, for everybody at the American Legion, the 2 million veterans we represent, have a good evening.